Hi, my name's Emily Smith, and I work at Teacher Created Materials, making books and resources for students and teachers around the world. Today, I'd like to read to you from one of my favorite fiction readers. It's called After the Ball. It's by Donna Horwick-Rice, and it was illustrated by Tom Bonson. Chapter 1, 12:01 a.m. Once upon a time. Well, that's that, Ella sighed, looking up the road at the hilltop castle, still lit up like New Year's Eve for the king's ball. She rested her chin in the heel of her hand, her elbow on her knee. It was beautiful, though. Wasn't it, Henry? Ella cast a sideways look at the muddled goose flapping its wings along the edge of the road. Honk, Henry replied. You're right, Ella answered in a hushed tone. I could never have imagined it. She glanced at the small party snuggled by her bare feet in the roadside dirt, some field mice, and one sturdy, round pumpkin, and sighed again. We knew it couldn't last, friends, she chuckled. I suppose we'd better start walking. I'll carry you in my pocket, little ones, she offered to the small brown mice, stooping to pick them up. She stopped short, though, when a glimmer in the moonlight caught her eye. What's this? Ella asked Henry, reaching for the shimmering object in the dirt. My shoe, she cried, delighted. That's impossible. I mean, slippers made of glass are impossible enough. But how in the world did this slipper last when everything else disappeared at the stroke of midnight? It's wonderful, don't you think, Henry? Ella shook her head in disbelief, putting the shoe in her left pocket and the field mice in her right. She was immediately grateful she'd added such roomy pockets when she'd made her skirt. Clever girl, Ella said, giving herself a well-earned pat on the back. Oh, what a night, she squealed. Field mice, a goose, a pumpkin, a ball, and a fairy godmother. I'd pinch myself awake, but this slipper seems to prove I'm not dreaming. Ella spun once and clapped her hands. Truly, never could I have imagined anything like this. And who would believe me? I can hardly believe myself. With that, she straightened her skirt, picked up the hefty pumpkin with a grunt, and stepped onto the moonlit road to begin her long walk home, Henry strutting by her side. Chapter 2, 9 p.m., earlier that night. Ella stepped, her glass-slippered foot, through the open coach door. She looked up the flight of marble stairs to the doorway above. There, 2 guards in red coats and white gloves announced the king's guests as they entered the ball. Henry, featherless and looking every inch the dashing coachman, helped her step down. Thank you, Henry, Ella said. Then she whispered in his ear, You are as handsome a coachman as you are a goose. Henry honked a chuckle in reply. Ella was still in awe from the past hour in which a woman with wings and a wand had appeared in her garden. The woman had called herself a fairy godmother. She waved her wand and poof! Henry was a coachman, a pumpkin was a coach, 4 field mice were horses, and Ella's everyday work clothes became the gown she now wore. And on her feet, shimmering, 2 slippers made of glass. Impossible! It's off to the ball with you, Ella dear, the fairy said. But don't delay. The magic lasts until the stroke of midnight, and not a moment longer. Ella had been weeping when the fairy arrived. She'd had a bitter day. In truth, she'd had some bitter years. Ella's mother died when Ella was a baby. Not long after, her father married a woman with 2 daughters of her own. They seemed kind enough. But when Ella's father also died, they showed their true colors. Ella became their servant. Most cruelly, they kept her away from visitors. Ella saw no one but her step-family, Henry, the field mice, and the birds nesting outside her attic window. One day, Ella's stepsisters saw her warming herself near the cinders of the fireplace. Laughing, they called her Cinderella, and now that's all they ever called her. They laughed again when she asked her stepmother, "Please, may I go to the king's ball?" Ella wore a pretty gown she'd made herself from fabric scraps. She felt like a princess. But her stepmother gave her a withering stare and mockingly replied, "You go to the king's ball? That's as crazy as a goose driving the carriage to take you there." "Cinderella!" her stepsisters hooted. But somehow her fairy godmother made it happen anyway. Just like that, the world changed before her eyes. Ella hadn't felt this happy since her father was alive. Stepping through the doorway into the palace, she saw everything go still. The ballroom before her was like a painted canvas filled with color and light. Dancers in fancy suits and gowns seemed frozen in motion, spinning and dipping to the music. Chandeliers hung across the arched ceiling. They cast the dancers in a golden glow. Servants with trays of food and drinks bobbed among the guests. Ella didn't realize she had walked into the center of the dance floor until a tap on her shoulder set the world back in motion. "Would you care to dance?" a handsome young man with laughing brown eyes asked her. Yes," Ella stammered and grinned. Before she knew it, she was waltzing across the floor with the prince, and all eyes were on her, the belle of the ball. All the minutes until midnight flew by in a haze of dancing and laughing, meeting new people and feeling free. She was Ella, not Cinderella, and no one told her what to do, where to go, or how to be. She was free to just be herself. It was no wonder Ella lost track of time until the first stroke of midnight reminded her. "Oh no, I've got to run," she told the prince and the startled group of partygoers surrounding her. And before they could stop her, she ran. She ran out the wide doorway and down the marble stairs, losing a slipper along the way. She ran into her waiting carriage, where an anxious Henry honked his concern and slammed the door behind her. Then the horses rounding the curve. Then the horses ran, rounding the corner beyond the palace gates, just as the last stroke of the hour chimed. And then it was over. The goose, the mice, the pumpkins, and Ella, back to themselves, sat at the side of the road. Then Ella found her glass slipper and started her journey back to where she began. Chapter 3, 12:10 a.m. Henry, Ella, and her pocketful of field mice hadn't traveled far when rumbling hooves raced up behind them. "Clear the road!" a voice in the night bellowed. Ella stepped aside a moment before 7 riders on horseback thundered past, the king's crest visible on their saddles. "Honk!" Henry shouted after them. "Absolutely," Ella agreed. They continued their journey silently, Ella lost in thought. The palace, the prince, and everything beyond her own familiar world swirled in her mind. There has to be more out there, Ella thought with yearning. I wonder if there is something more for me. Of course there is, a sprightly voice suddenly chimed. Fairy godmother, Ella startled. You've got to stop sneaking up on me. Oh, sorry about that, but yes, certainly. There's a great deal more to the world, and there's nothing keeping you from it. My stepmother would never allow me. The fairy smiled lovingly, her eyes kind and gentle. You have your own life to live, my dear. But how was the ball? The fairy godmother interrupted. Oh, I had the loveliest time, Ella beamed. But look, she added, fishing the glass slipper from her pocket. I discovered this slipper after everything else disappeared. Why didn't it? Let's just call it a souvenir, the godmother winked. But was the evening everything you imagined? Did it make you happy?" "It was wonderful, godmother," Ella answered truthfully. "It was glamorous and charming in ways I never dreamed. But after all, it was just a party, and I'm still me, longing for something more." "I see. Well, dearest, whatever will you do about that?" the godmother prodded. "Goodness, I don't know. I don't see what I can do. But tonight, I have seen what I can be. I have some thinking to do, I imagine." "I have confidence in you, my dear. After all, the gown doesn't make the girl, now does it?" "No, I suppose not," Ella began, realizing suddenly that she was talking to the knight, the fairy godmother having vanished as quickly as she arrived. "Huh?" Henry questioned. "I have no idea," Ella answered. Chapter 4, 1 a.m. Ella was relieved to find the house dark when she arrived. Saying good night to Henry and the mice in the garden, she went inside and placed the pumpkin in the pantry. She then made up the fire and lit the lamps, waiting for the others to return. Before long, their coach turned up the drive, and Ella greeted them. No sooner had they stepped from the carriage than they began to ply her with stories of the ball. They talked on and on about the strange, selfish girl who had stolen the prince's attention. "She was so ugly," one sister said, while the other added, "She smelled too." Ella said nothing, but she smiled to herself while helping them with their wraps and hats. Something was suddenly very clear to her. They were jealous. They only said hateful things about the stranger to avoid feeling bad about themselves. Then something else became clear. "They are jealous of me," she thought. She pitied her sisters for how little they liked themselves. Ella's stepmother simply sat and listened, looking quizzically at Ella through narrowed eyes. "I wonder," she thought. Chapter 5, 10 a.m. Ella thought the stepsisters would never stop talking, but finally they fell asleep. And so could Ella. It seemed she had barely closed her eyes, though, before the rooster crowed. She was up doing her morning chores as the sun rose, and she had pumpkin pies and pumpkin soup cooking before her stepmother and stepsisters got out of bed. "Do you have to make so much noise?" one stepsister barked as she stumbled to the kitchen table, yawning and stretching. The second stepsister added, "You're always so thoughtless. Don't you know people are sleeping?" "Ella," her stepmother said quietly, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "I wonder what you can tell me about this," she asked. She held Ella's glass slipper in her outstretched hands. Ella gasped, but before she could answer, horses' hooves clattered on the drive and a loud knock sounded through the house. "Take her to her room and lock the door," Ella's stepmother snapped. Her stepsisters each grabbed Ella by an arm and dragged her to her room. Click! They locked the door firmly behind them. Ella ran to the window in her attic room just in time to see the riders enter the house far below. Among them was one young man who particularly caught her attention. She would recognize his smiling eyes anywhere. Ella threw open the window to call out to the prince, but it was too late. She heard the heavy front door shut with a thud behind him. That closing door snapped something inside Ella. In an instant, she was certain of two things. One, somehow, some way, she was going to get out of this room and talk to the prince. Two, today was the day her life would change. Looking quickly around her room, Ella spotted her scrap bag. She tied and stitched pieces of fabric together to make a rope. She secured the rope to her bed frame, threw it out the window, and shinnied down it to the ground below. "That's mine," she said, walking into the room as her stepmother held up Ella's shoe for the prince to see. The prince held one just like it, the one Ella had lost on the palace steps. "It's you!" The prince's eyes gleamed. "I've been looking for you everywhere. We've searched since midnight trying to find you. The woman who wears this slipper." "It belongs to me, I told you." Ella's stepmother howled, grasping for the slipper while losing control of the one in her hand. Fortunately, a quick-thinking guard snatched the falling slipper before it shattered. "No, it's mine!" the stepsisters screeched in unison, shoving their mother away. "No, I'm quite certain it's hers," the prince said, smiling at Ella, and handing her the slipper while the guard handed her its partner. "Yes, they are both mine," Ella agreed, smiling back. "But why are you looking for me?" "Isn't it obvious? My father hosted the ball to help me find a bride, and I've chosen you. Marry me, Ella." Ella's stepmother and stepsisters stared open-mouthed and wide-eyed. "Marry you? I am honored, Your Highness, and I enjoyed your company at the palace ball. But we hardly know each other. Perhaps you could start by telling me your name?" The prince's face registered shock, confusion, and finally, agreement. You're right. I'm William, and I'd be honored to know you better." "Thank you, William. I'm Ella. But now, I must excuse myself, as I have much to accomplish. I'm leaving today to make my way in the world. These glass slippers should fetch a princely sum. I'll use the money to open Ella's Designs, my own dressmaking shop, specializing in large pockets. Every woman needs roomy pockets, I think." The prince smiled his approval. "May we offer you a ride into town? I can introduce you to someone there who deals with special items like these slippers, and I'm sure she can help you sell them. I call her Godmother." Ella laughed. "I'd be delighted, William, and actually, I may know her already." Then, turning to her stepfamily, Ella added, "May you be as happy here among yourselves as you have always tried to make me. Oh, and I'll be taking the goose and the field mice with me." The women's stares widened as they watched Ella, William, the guards, the goose, the mice, and the slippers leave the house forever and disappear down the road. Chapter 6, 9 p.m., 3 years later. The palace was lit up like New Year's Eve as dancers spun and dipped and servants bobbed among them. In the courtyard, a gaggle of geese paraded around the fountain, shaking their tail feathers and honking with delight. In the garden, the field mice pranced like ponies among the pumpkins. And high above, on the palace balcony, Ella and William looked out at the moonlit road leading from the palace. "It's been quite a journey from there to here, hasn't it, Ella?" William asked. "Yes, it has," Ella answered. In a whirl, the past 3 years flashed before her. She saw her dress shop, now a huge success. She saw the time she and William spent together getting acquainted. She saw herself becoming the Ella she was always meant to be. And she saw the new life they had started, married at last. "Will it be happily ever after from now on?" William wondered. "I don't know," Ella answered truthfully. "But I'm happy right now, and that will do." "Honk," Henry called from below. "I couldn't agree more," Ella replied. Thanks for listening as I shared this twist on a very familiar story.